Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our second Facebook Live report here on Thursday evening. This is our second installment, as I said, and we're happy to have you with us tonight. Before we start into our report and then your questions, really wanted to just a brief word about the terrible disaster in Nova Scotia this past week. We saw, of course, the events on Saturday evening and Sunday. We're all here of us, and certainly in our part of the province and across the country. Our hearts are with all of the people in Nova Scotia, our fellow Canadian citizens who are seeing just devastated, quite honestly, by the terrible events, unimaginable impacts on families and first responders. They're working every day to come through the worst of that. And I think they ought to know that we're going to be thinking of them as well in this terrible time. Not that we've got a lot of things on our plate these days, and that certainly came as a terrible blow, and one that we'll be certainly thinking of our compatriots there in Nova Scotia in the days ahead. Well, let me get to our broadcast this evening. I'm going to open up, as I did last week, with a few remarks on the updates to the federal programs, a brief update on the Simcoe-Muskoka District Health Units reports and how you can get those. We're going to talk just briefly about what's happening in Parliament. I had a first sitting earlier this week, and I'll kind of give you a bit of a view as to what is going to be coming ahead for Parliament between now and towards the end of May. And then we're going to go to questions. I have Curtis Schluter with me here again this evening to help. He will be moderating some of the questions, and all the questions, I should say, as they come in on the chat line. Associated with this Facebook Live. And Curtis, I think you can see him there. So he'll be moderating those questions. So Curtis, I think any updates or anything you can tell our audience at home in terms of the questions to make sure we get them?
Yeah, everybody. So as Bruce mentioned, I'll be checking on all of the questions as they come in during the live stream. So if you have any questions throughout the show, whether it's during the Q&A period or while Bruce is giving an update on programs, feel free to drop them in the comment section of the live stream, and we'll make sure we can pass those along to Bruce during the Q&A portion.
Great. Well, let's start off with our good friends at the Simcoe-Muskoka District Health Unit have been getting regular bulletins out to various stakeholders. They're constantly updating their website, and they have some new tools on there around the health stats and on a case explorer to keep people here in Simcoe County and the Muskoka region that is in their district completely up to date. They also have the director, the CEO of the health unit, Dr. Charles Gardner. He is doing regular updates on his Facebook page every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 1 p.m. So that's going to be going on. So if you want to get a really good take on what's happening here locally with respect to COVID-19 on the health front, Dr. Charles Gardner, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 1 o'clock. Now let's get into our just a brief report on update on some of the programs where this is, as I mentioned last week, this is a constantly changing scenario. Prime Minister Trudeau will go out and announce some of his programs at Rideau Cottage, and then we wait for some of the details, and we're doing our best to keep up with those as they become available. So two things I mentioned last week. One is the Canada Emergency Business Account. That's the $40,000 loan for small businesses to help them defray their fixed costs. There was a question with regards to how you measure the payroll. So the businesses that have between $20,000 and $1.5 million in payroll are eligible to work through their bank to get that loan. The question is, what do you measure payroll as? Does it include benefits, or is it just wages and salaries? And indeed, it is just wages and salaries. So the money in your business that you spend for your share of EI or CPP or other benefits that you give your employees, that's not included in those calculations. Another just point of clarification on another program that is available through the federal government now, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, or CERB. I mentioned last week that there's a new program for essential frontline workers. If they earn below $2,500 a month, the federal government will give them a top-up of $1,000 a month. I mentioned at the time we weren't too sure which categories of workers those would be. And we've since learned that that list of essential workers who will be eligible for that $1,000 additional monies, if you're below that regular earnings of $2,500 a month, that will be a list that will be provided, in our case, by the province of Ontario. So the federal government's working with the provinces to them determine what that list should be. Now, some of the new programs that have been recently announced. One, again, this is for businesses, in particular commercial landlords. So a landlord that is renting business space or other commercial property, and their tenants are having real difficulties coming to grips with the financial pressure of COVID-19. There's a program now called the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Benefit. This will work through the provinces again and will be available relatively soon. We're waiting on some details. It'll be available for the months of April, May, and June. And the way it works is that if a landlord is able to either reduce or forgive rents for their tenants, they'll be able to get some monies either through a loan or a forgivable loan from the Government of Canada to help backstop that cost for them. So it's a way to give some relief through the landlord and then through them to the tenant to just ease up on those fixed costs for small businesses. Another program, and we do here, I must say, at our offices, there's a ton of businesses, even though these programs are are targeted to try and get to the largest swath of businesses and work can. There's invariably going to be some that for whom it will not work. So what the government has done is gotten some dollars out to Canada's economic development agencies and the community futures development organizations. For us here in Simcoe North, that includes the North Simcoe Community Futures Development Corporation, but also the Aurelia Area CDC. So organizations like those two, the CFDCs as we call them, all across Canada, they have $287 million of additional monies that they can help get to businesses that are not able to access things like the Canada Emergency Business Account, the $40,000 loan, or things like the wage subsidy. Those are programs that are sort of really framed to certain business audiences and ultimately to support workers. But for those for whom those programs don't work, your community futures organizations in town would be a good place to connect with. The program the details haven't come out yet, but when they do, that would be your first point of contact. We're about a week away from when you would normally be having to file your taxes. So a week from today is April the 30th, and normally that's your tax due date. And that, of course, and I think I may have even mentioned it last week, that's been moved up to June the 1st. And that means that's your filing date. And now if you owe money for your 2019 taxes, that money is doesn't have to be paid, and you won't incur any penalties or interest, but until after the 31st of August. So that any of you owe taxes additionally, after you've done your filing on June 1st, up to June 1st, you have until the 31st of August to make any payments on that. So that's something to remember. And so we don't have to rush out the end of April like we quite often do to get those tax filings done. Another program that just had recently been announced just this past week is a program for the sports, heritage, and culture organizations. It's $500 million. It's going to be distributed through Heritage Canada. And this is for organizations in our communities that support artists, athletes, people who, it's been very clear that all of the events and activities that would normally be income producing for people in the arts and heritage sector, that's all dried up because there's just no events going on. Many of the usual venues for us here, like the Midland Cultural Center and the Aurelia Opera House, special arts presentation places are all closed. So this is a way to support the artists that would normally be getting some income through that. Another new program is going to be for the nonprofit and charitable sector. It's been very clear that the COVID-19 crisis has very much negatively impacted a lot of the vulnerable people in our community. So there's an additional $350 million through organizations like the Red Cross, United Way, and Community Foundations Canada to get dollars into the hands of agencies in our community that help with transportation, with help getting food to vulnerable people, to do training for volunteers that will be able to help in the community during this critical time. For us, we have two community foundations, one in Aurelia and one in Huronia. Each of them do amazing work, raising money to get dollars out to important community-based organizations that help people each and every day. And then the final, and a really big one actually, we talked about this last week as well, and that was the programs for students. At the time, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, students were not eligible for that because they hadn't lost work because of COVID-19. They were all at school. So the government announced just 2 days ago $9 billion in new funding and programs specifically to post-secondary students and those who have recently graduated post-secondary. They'll now, because they're not eligible for either the CERB or for EI, and they don't have jobs available to them this summer, they'll be able to apply soon for this new Canada Emergency Student Benefit. That's $1,250 per month. It'll go from May until the end of August. And in addition to that, there will be a grant for those who wish to volunteer. So there'll be all kinds of amazing causes that students, again, this is specifically for post-secondary students, if they're volunteering over the course of the summer, depending on the number of hours that they put in those volunteer roles, anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000 that they can get through that grant program for volunteering in the community and helping out at a time when so many agencies are needing extra help to serve the people here at home. Now, a word or two just on Parliament. You will know that we had the Parliament went back on Monday, and with that, and I should say, just to backtrack here, April 20th, Monday, was the date that after the House rose on the 13th of March, they set April 20th as the recall date. Well, of course, we know what's happened since that time, the social distancing, the public health, importance of public health and abiding by the recommendations of public health people made it very clear that there's no way we're going to see every MP coming back in on Monday the 20th. So the parties had to work out what's going to happen next. They did that last weekend, and now we have a situation where the House has created what we call a special committee on the COVID-19 pandemic, and that committee will sit in person 1 day a week on Wednesdays from now through until May 25th. And in addition to that one in-person sitting, I should just make a point here, the in-person sitting is going to be that same small number of MPs that you've seen, probably no more than about 40, and in proportion to the parties, how they're represented in the House. That means we don't have to bring in staff. We keep it to a very, very much a minimum. Parliamentary staff, very small numbers are needed for that. And that committee will do that in-person sitting just 1 day. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, starting the week after next, there's going to be a virtual sitting of this special committee on COVID-19. So that's going to be done through, I'm sure, a software program that many are familiar with now called Zoom. And it will be broadcast. So there'll be a Zoom committee meeting, and that's going to be broadcast to all the Canadians, likely through CPAC or online. And there you will see as chair occupants managing a Zoom call effectively of parliamentarians so that MPs can ask questions of the various government ministers. So next week, that's going to happen. The virtual sitting is on Tuesday. The in-person sitting will be Wednesday. And then we go a week after that, we'll have a Tuesday virtual, a Wednesday in-person, and a Thursday virtual starting into the first week of May. And that will run right through till May 25th. So I'm really glad that the parties were able to get that pulled together. And I think at that point, we will take your questions. And the way that's going to work is Curtis has got the questions up here in the chat room for me. So I'm going to repeat the questions so that viewers will know which one I'm dealing with. So let's go to the first one, and it's from Yvette. And she says, questions about heating contractors. Are we considered essential if we have to maintain heating appliances? That's a good question for our provincial government. They're the ones that decide what that. My understanding of it is that any kind of maintenance of critical infrastructure continues on for the construction industry. As the way I understand it, this is where I, would have somebody like Jill Dunlop on the call to kind of help out with something like this. But my understanding is that a limited amount of work can be done, especially if you're repairing an appliance. Anything that's a necessity, contractors will still be doing a limited amount of that work. I recommend that, Yvette, that you maybe check with your contractor to see what restrictions, if any, they have. Now to Brandon, a procedural question. His understanding is that Parliament needs to pass the newly announced student aid package. That's correct. That's the student benefit that I talked about. And in all likelihood, Brandon, that may or may not be ready this coming Wednesday. Pretty short timeline. They might though, so stand by on Wednesday. That in-person sitting that is available to Parliament between now and May 25th, it can also be used for passing legislation. So there is a means. Parliament has, we don't know at any one point, when they might need to bring a bill into the House. It can only be on COVID-19, I should point out, until such time as we get past this. We won't be dealing with any other bills of that nature or outside of the COVID-19 requirement. So yes, it does need to be passed. And was there something else, Curtis, can you spool that up again just for Brandon's? Was a second part of his question there? Maybe if you could just see it there.
Just on the bottom portion,
yeah.
Parliament's not scheduled to sit until May 25th. In theory, this means financial support may not.
I'm not able to hear that, actually. Okay, so let's carry on. Thanks for that, Curtis. I appreciate it. Now, Ellen is asking, is there any help paying independent contractors? Nothing specific on that, Ellen. So, for an independent contractor, this is why some of this extra income support is there, though, to help people pay these kinds of bills. So nothing specific in terms of construction or independent contractors. Comment, any questions on the, oh yeah, so Curtis is reminding me here that questions on what constitutes an essential business. He's put a number up there, 888-444-3659. You can see it in the chat room or contact our MPP. Oscar's Variety is asking, got a great question from them last week as well. Wondering if the government has investigated other options for small business to perhaps not be limited in some purchases, as they are also supplying and lessening the burden on larger businesses. I.e. the wait lines and necessary groceries, as well as anyone shopping for their own. So not too sure on that one. There's certainly, I would say to the good folks at Oscar's Variety, the government is receiving suggestions on these kinds of things at all times. And we're serving as a kind of a conduit for those suggestions. I know some of the changes that we've seen to these programs have been just because of great suggestions like this. So happy to take that up with the folks at Oscar's Variety, and maybe we can work on that to get that to the right people who can decide. Yvette, question, how does a small business that has been told to shut down pay its debtors if there are no financing and funding programs available to us? The 40,000 program you can't use to pay your debts. Well, I put it this way: if you're eligible for the $40,000 Canada Emergency Business Account, how you work with that in terms of being able to pay some of those fixed costs, that's exactly what it's for. So it's to help take the pressure off so that you can meet some of those key monthly commitments. In other words, to stay in a reasonably good financial shape. I'd also suggest that you, if you're eligible for CEBA, the business account, please do that. But if you're not, if you don't meet that standard of payroll between 20,000 and 1.5 million or something like that, check with your CDC, the Community Futures, and they've got something coming up that might help in cases like that. Adam asks, when is the ideal date to apply or reapply for the CERB? You go to your My CRA account, and if you had, Adam, if you had $5,000 in earnings last year or in the last 12 months, and you're out of work because of the COVID-19, you should apply right away. Call our office if you want a little bit more clarity on that, but there's no real set date to apply. That portal is open. It goes retroactive to the 15th of March and forward for whenever that date was. The Ontario Musicians Cooperative asks, what do Canada Summer Jobs Grant applicants need to do in order to update their application so that they can extend the jobs through February of 2021? Great question, and that informs exactly what Service Canada has done in this case, is really extend those the limitations, the dates that is, for when those jobs can apply to through until next February. They're also giving firms a lot more flexibility compared to when they sent their original applications in January, and now we have this whole different scenario. Organizations that are able to and have been approved for Canada Summer Jobs funding, that money can be going to jobs that are different than what you first applied for. So you have some flexibility there. As far as the revised plan, what will happen is if you've been approved, Service Canada will talk to you about that, and that's when you can discuss how you're going to change. They'll be interested to know that any of the students that you bring in on those jobs can do so safely, and so those will be some questions. So you'll have a direct conversation with somebody from Service Canada on that. Ellen asks, oh, I'm sorry, Dawn. Dawn, when will the details of the new Heritage and Culture Fund become available? We don't have a set date on that. Stay tuned, is all I can say. The lag time on these programs have tended to be anywhere from a week to 3 weeks. As an example, right now, we're just waiting literally any day. We're going to see that the Canada wage subsidy, emergency wage subsidy, will be open for people to make their applications. And that's been about probably 2.5 weeks since that was announced. So stay tuned, watch the website, and watch, I'm sure, Prime Minister Trudeau and his updates that we get each day. Ellen asks, I love the idea about dollars for student volunteers. Yes, I agree, you're right. Goodyear office posts a list of organizations in Simcoe North likely to need volunteers. Yes, we'd be happy to do that. It's also available through organizations like Information Aurelia. And in Midland, we have, oh my goodness, we have a wonderful organization in Midland that does the very same thing, links up to the community organizations that are in that business. But I think some work around finding out where those volunteer opportunities, that's something we can certainly look into. Carrie asks, my brother-in-law works very hard to support his family. He's a personal support worker. One job Monday, Friday. Pardon me. He now has to pick up one job, will lose $1,500 a month, but makes over $2,300 at the other one. So he doesn't qualify for any assistance, but nonetheless, he's not getting the $1,500 a month he always worked for. Is there any help for this situation? So let me just take a look at this again. So he's doing some part-time work, and he can actually earn up to earn up to $1,000 a month without having to lose your CERB benefit. But once you earn more than 1,000, you're not eligible to get anything on the CERB. So I'd ask Carrie maybe to give us a shout and see if we can look at some calculations there for you. But as a PSW, I suspect that he will be, if he's under $2,500 a month, he'll be eligible for that $1,000 a month top up. Donna asked, do you think that the schools will reopen at all before the end of June? Boy, that really is the question of the day, I'm sure, on the minds of so many families. I take the view, I mean, we'll see as we get past the peak of cases here in Ontario, but I would say that there's a good chance that that may not happen. That is the schools going back sometime in June. I think it would be wise at least to have that in the back of your mind as to, you know, how you would work around that. But it's a great question for the province. And I think even Premier Ford is watchful. He's been very clear that, you know, we're not at a point yet where we can even come close to sort of pinpointing a date on that. But I think realistically and common sense would suggest that, you know, the way this is going and looking at the way it has unfolded in other countries and other parts of the world, we're not at a point where we can open up the economy just yet and get people back into the community. Excuse me. Donna asks, do you think the school, oh, I got that one right, sorry. Shona asks, what resource do you have for all businesses to source personal protective equipment as we reopen the province? I'm going to turn that one over to Curtis to see. He's been doing some work with some local companies around PPE. And Curtis, I wonder if I could just turn this one over to you to see if we have any other resources that might help.
Sorry about that, just unmuting my mic. Yeah, so Health Canada has put up some links, and we can get those up on our social media page here with contacts to the department directly if you're seeking any medical devices such as masks, sanitizer. Obviously, a large portion of the government has been looking at acquiring those for the healthcare sector, but they do have contacts in place that can assist in connecting you with any PPE you may need. As well, companies such as 3M, Amazon, eBay as well, they have PPE up on their site. So it is a recommendation from the department to be ordering wherever you can find PPE in stock, because likely there might not be anything in stores as of yet.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Curtis. And it's helpful to help to have a little bit more insight into some of these things. Yvette has a question here. Is the $1,000 gross or net pay? So I would take it the way this is working on other programs that it really has to do with your wage or salary. So it would be your gross pay. So whatever your wage, this is before taxes or other deductions. So if you, I believe that's relating to the CERB. You have the ability now to, as I mentioned in an earlier question, to earn up to $1,000 per month and not disqualify yourself from the CERB. In other words, you can earn that up to $1,000 and still get the CERB. Just a point on the CERB that we've come to know, even though they don't take deductions on that benefit that you're getting, at the end of the year when you file your 2020 tax return, all of any of the benefit that you have received from the CERB will still be regarded as income to you through the course of the year, just as if it was wage income. So there will be a potential tax, depending on your tax situation, a potential tax assessment on those income at the end of the year. Edward asks if, pardon me, it's so hard for people living on ODSP. Yeah, we've heard this as well. And there's no doubt of the struggles of people who are on a fixed social assistance type income. It's one of the reasons why we saw some additional monies to come to help people make sure they can get food deliveries and supports for people who are lower income, perhaps living alone in a difficult spot. So I think the discussion around, well, people who are on ODSP or some kind of basic pension may not qualify for any of these new benefits, Edward. The issue is a bigger one in terms of how we look as governments, federal and provincial governments. How do we best make sure that people who are on that kind of a basic income can do so without, being impoverished, to support them the very best way we can. That's going to be a discussion that will always be ongoing. But it's so important that you share that kind of realistic information with policymakers like ourselves so we can find ways to do a better job. But it's very evident to me and in listening to the people in our communities in Orillia, Midland, Penetanguishene, that the tough issues around low income, poverty, and lack of affordable housing. So these are issues we'll continue to take up even after COVID-19. Carrie asks, do essential workers include grocery store workers and fast food restaurants for the top up to $2,500? Carrie, it's a good question. That's one that we had earlier up. There's a line you can call. I'm not even sure, quite honestly, if the province of Ontario has given that list yet as to what they will consider on that list of essential workers. It's up to them. The province will make that determination. My sense is that it's going to really, likely right off the bat, any sort of frontline healthcare workers will invariably be on that list. As to how broadly that goes out to other essentials in the community, we'll have to wait and see what the province does on that. Very good question. Ellen asks, could I explain the redeployment of military personnel to the provinces for COVID assistance, how that works? Does the federal government defense minister decide if it will happen, and what are the federal requirements to make that? Excellent question. So the way it works in Canada is that when a province, you'll know right now in the province of Ontario, we're under the auspices of the Emergencies Act, effectively for the province, and that may not be the actual legal name of the emergencies legislation that we're operating under. But the province can at any time put the request to the Canadian Armed Forces for that kind of assistance. Prime Minister indicated some weeks ago that, in fact, here in Borden, in Simcoe County, many of the armed forces elements that would be part of that COVID-19 response started to assemble at base Borden. But I think the call out both here in Ontario and in Quebec was for extra Canadian Armed Forces personnel to help in the medical front in long-term care homes, and that's where they're being needed now. So how does that work? The request goes in, the minister authorizes it. It's essentially a rubber stamp, and the military go and they serve so well in our communities. And anytime a province asks, they're at the ready. Let's see where we go now. That was, okay, let's go to Shona, I guess. Made a comment, basically, one of the service medical health providers here in Aurelia are currently shipping hand sanitizer, gloves to existing customers. Moms and pops should reach out to local folks and ask them to have them try and add to their order. And that's an excellent comment. That was Bayside Medical and Superior Medical in Toronto. And they're wanting to do everything they can to get this personal protective equipment out to key providers. Again, that's something that is kind of coordinated. A good question for coordination even of our medical administration here in Simcoe County, through the health unit, through the hospitals. They're all in discussions on a regular basis. And I know from hearing from our hospital administrators that we in this region seem to be managing pretty well at the acute care area, but there is a notable lack of PPE for people who are in essential workers, like everything from truckers to people who are doing deliveries and helping people at the community level. So that's something that we really need to work hard on, but thank you for that comment. CJ asks, regarding the emergency wage subsidy, if some employers are already partially subsidized through their federal funding, like that's the CERB, is there a way to apply for less than 75% through the wage subsidy? The answer is no. You can't overlap the CERB, that's the $2,000 a month, with the wage subsidy. So here's a scenario. Let's say you were getting the CERB for the first month from mid-March to mid-April. Then the wage subsidy was announced that it was available. Your employer could hire you back under the wage subsidy, even if he or she didn't have any work for you, hire you back, put you on the wage subsidy on a sort of paid leave kind of scenario. But the date that you start that wage subsidy would have to be the date after the period that applies under the CERB. So if the CERB benefit took you to the 15th of April, the wage subsidy couldn't really start for you until the 16th. You can't overlap the two. And just one more here, and then we'll get close to a wrap up. John asks, Bruce, I think it is unfair that his business doesn't qualify as he doesn't pay himself a salary. He uses a dividend instead. So I assume this is to do with the wage subsidy, or it could to do with there's also a measure of payroll as it relates to the Canada Emergency business account. So you're right, though, the only time a dividend can be considered is for the CERB. So people who are self-employed, to meet that threshold of having earned $5,000 in the previous year, if your only earnings was dividends and it was more than $5,000, that does qualify you for the CERB. But when it comes to looking at matters of the business account, which does that measure of salary, yes, dividends do not fit into that qualification. And for what it's worth, some parties in Parliament have made that very point, that the government really should be looking at having a broader definition of what goes in for the purposes of eligibility for that wage subsidy. So stand by on that, John. That is an active area of policy discussion. And as with many of these programs, they have tended to change over time as the government is hearing more and more as to where these programs are not fitting. So again, John, I'd be happy to take that up with a little bit more detail. If you'd like, contact our office and we'd be happy to relay that very scenario that you described to our shadow minister. He's in discussion with the finance minister at all times. So I think, thank you for your questions, by the way. Tremendous insights. This is helpful to me as well, because I get a sense of what people are hearing and experiencing in their own businesses and in their homes. So we're going to be here this time next week again around 7 o'clock. So tune in. We hope next week, with anything that happens over the course of this next 7 days, we'll provide some updates. We'll also, at some point in time in the future, we're going to invite some guests onto the show. If you have some ideas of who you'd like to have join me for one of these Facebook Lives, let me know. And I would be happy to get some invites out, because anything we can do to help inform you and keep you aware of how these programs are going, the better. Just keep in mind, for those that want to contact our office, we're open every Monday through Friday, 9 to 4:30. We don't have people in the offices. We can't have, we have no in-person meetings in the office. Staff are here to answer phones and to get your emails responded to. I'd like to thank our crew that worked for us this evening. Curtis, of course, my able assistant that does a lot of my policy and correspondence work, and my communications director, David Dalrymple. He doesn't have a camera at his station, but he's the kind of behind the scenes director, so he's giving me a thumbs up here right now. Thanks for his work in putting the show together. And of course, we don't want to finish off without paying homage and tribute to the amazing people in our riding who are there for us each and every day. Those in the healthcare sector, helping people who are ill, treating the people who are having a tougher go than most with this COVID-19, keeping our shelves stocked, keeping our mail delivered, keeping our goods delivered. It's really uplifting to see how Canadians are coming together at this time of need. And we couldn't be more proud of the efforts that you're making each and every day. So have a good night, stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you next week.